Oh
Hey, everybody.
man. Wow.
You, thank you all for being here. It's the best moment when all the squares come together. Actually, I realized that saying squares coming together meant something very different than it does now in the Zoom era. This is not a group of squares. I'm going to thank you all for being here. As ever, if people would like to, you're welcome to turn on your camera. We are recording this event. I'll be talking about this a little bit more as we get going, but yeah, it's wonderful to see some some familiar names. See some other forecast friends. This
Yeah,
is
I'm very surprised some of the names that are appearing.
it's wonderful. Well, I can see that we've been spreading the word.
Sorry, I just saw somebody.
Who are you shouting out? Huh?
Kay Butler, I see you. I see
Oh
you,
my
William.
god. What's up, homies? These are both of
God,
my homies.
I'm like even more nervous now.
Right? Uh,
Oh,
Well, since people are here, we're a little bit after 6. Why don't we go ahead and kick it off? It's great to see some new faces. Yeah, so my name is Dave Elving. I'm the interim executive director here at San Francisco Camera Work. And as we get started, we want to pause for a moment and acknowledge, as a Bay Area organization, we inhabit land that was once occupied by the ancestral homes of the Ohlone people. And we are grateful that we get to share that land, even though most of our meetings are happening virtually now. And one of the great things about meeting virtually is it allows us to come together in ways that wouldn't be possible. Artists in Houston and Fayetteville, Arkansas, usually can't pop over to San Francisco to do a talk. So we're really grateful that Irene and Rana can join us here today. We are a nonprofit organization, so if you are a member, thank you. If you're not a member, we do events like this all the time. So we hope to see you again. Visit our website, sanfranciscocamerawork.org. You can become a member and see what's happening in the near future. Today, we're really excited. This is the first talk we are doing around our latest digital exhibit, Forecast 2020. And we fielded over 300 applications, and we had 3 incredible jurors go through all of that work and choose 12 artists that we're really excited to showcase. Typically, we do this in a gallery. Obviously, it has to be digital now, but that allows us to share a lot more work than we otherwise would be able to do. Instead of just an image, we're able to share, well, a curated body of work. And one of the special things that started to emerge in Forecast this year are some relationships with those bodies of work. And Rana Young and Irene Reece are both artists who've done incredible work with archives, family archives. And we've been talking about that a little bit behind the scenes. The sort of excitement that we all feel, particularly around this time of year, when you find that old photo album or you open a drawer and discover a history that you weren't a part of, but is somehow a part of you, and what that means and how to channel it into creative work. And we're so excited to share both of these artists' work as part of Forecast 2020, and we're excited to bring them together today. So this evening, first Irene will speak, and we'll chat a little bit, and then Rana will have a chance to present her work and her perspective on working with archives. And then we're going to do something a little bit different than we've done in prior programs. We're going to have a conversation together, Irene and Rana, and of course, all of you in the audience. So at any point tonight, if you'd like to enter a question into the chat, please do so. We'll come back to it towards the end. And once again, we are recording this. Feel free to unmute or turn on your camera if you'd like to participate, but you certainly don't have to. So with that, I'm going to introduce our first artist, Irene Reece. Thank you so much for being here. We're excited to see your work and talk with you tonight.
Thank you. I think I'll just start. Oh, awesome. Oh, it's just already. Oh, it's not letting me share.
Give it another try.
Okay. Okay, perfect.
It wouldn't be a Zoom meeting without, sharing screens and checking if things are on.
Yeah, no. Hold on. 1 second.
Take your time.
Sorry.
I'm going to do
I
something.
should be a pro at this already.
You know what? You know how many times I've started speaking only for people to tell me I was still on mute? Uh,
Oh no.
every day. All right. It's looking great. Go ahead.
Yeah. Let me do full screen. Okay. So the work that I submitted for SF CameraWorks is my series called Billy James. I'm sure some of you have seen it, and maybe you're tired of my family archives, but I wanted to submit this because I think it's important to have Black family archives in circulation. I created this work to showcase the parallels of my father's upbringing in the late 50s, being a Black boy in a southern small town in Conroe, Texas, versus my upbringing in Houston, Texas, and being half Black and half Mexican. And I found a lot of parallels and how nothing has really changed in regards to discrimination and racism. But I also wanted to showcase the fluidity of the Black identity and the Black imagery. And so I started off with looking at my family archives. So this picture is very important to me. It's the woman that's sitting in the chair. She is my great, great, great aunt. Her name was Aunt Vicey, and she was a slave. And that's a privilege for me to have that photo. Not everyone has that type of family archive. I was very blessed to obtain that family archive through my family. The woman that's standing in the photograph, her name is actually Irene. And so my great grandmother is named after her. So having that connection and that significance of my namesake was also very much important to showcase. I also used work, I also created my own images. So because it's comparing with the previous image, I found cotton bales in Houston, like at antique shops for some reason. And I made a performative act of like carrying them to feel the weight of it. Um, and so I took a picture of it. Also, the work is influenced by James Baldwin and his debate with William F. Buckley in 1965 about the Black lives. Is the Black life, is the American dream at the expense of Black lives? And reading the transcript, a lot was very similar to what my father went through and what I went through. And so just seeing all these different generations of how nothing has changed, but also talking about how nothing has changed in regards to the positive imagery of Black families, of Black people. It's just has never been shown or celebrated. So we'll just go through, because I want to focus more on the family archive since we're talking about that. This picture is very significant to me. This is my father's childhood birthday party. I believe he was 6 years old. I kept this picture in here because I created this in grad school. And I went to a very much predominant white European art program. And when I had this picture, they had asked me if I had made the picture, if I composite it, because they had never seen an image of Black birthday parties, of a middle class Black family's birthday party. And they didn't believe that that was real. And so that made me realize that they only had one narrative of what a Black family is supposed to look like. And so I wanted to eliminate that narrative and show that it's not linear. The Black experience, Black imagery, none of it is linear. It's very much fluid. I also use, I really don't want to go into this either because that's, since we're focusing more on family archives. This is another one. I don't know who's in these photographs. This was, how I obtained all of these photographs was through my grandmother. And so I had asked her to tell me who are the people in the pictures so that I can at least identify them and acknowledge them. And in this case, she doesn't know who's in this picture, but I thought it was beautiful to showcase the grouping of Black individuals. But I think how I look at archives is how each individual picture holds a spirit. And so when you bring them back into circulation, it's almost as if that they're alive again. Whether I know them or not, I just feel that I just need to at least look at them, scan them, preserve them, and I feel like I'm protecting them, like it's their own person. And so that was also my process when dealing with the family archives. This is my father's childhood home. Um, I don't know why I picked this, but it was very much important for me to have because we don't own that house anymore. In fact, the dirt plot that's on the bottom is where they live now. So when we go and visit, the house is still there, but we don't own it. But just in having that memory and time is very much important. In this picture, this is my great grandparents. They ran a sugar cane mill in Willis, Texas, which is like north of Conroe, Texas. Um, I wanted to showcase how I came from farmers, I came from innovators and strong, hardworking Black lives. So that was the reason why I kept that piece in there. I also showcased a lot of work about my father's relationship to his parents. I feel like it's not talked a lot about a Black mother's love and about a Black father's love. And so I just would mirror it with my imagery. I don't think I put it in this slide, but there's pictures of my father holding me this way when I was a child. And so I would pair them next to each other to showcase that parallel. Um, this is a heavy piece. Okay, this is a picture of my aunt. This piece was fairly new because when I first started this series, there was only about 10 images, and I put this one in here because of what happened last year. My aunt had passed away, and so that was my way of remembering her, was incorporating her in this work, because my work is cathartic and it is a form of therapy for me. However I'm feeling in that moment in time, that determines what the piece will be in that moment. So the work is always growing. There's never an ending point. And this was also a, a form of like performance for me. Um, these are my family members that have passed on. So the flowers represent in church when someone passes on, or how I was raised, you put white flowers. And when you're commemorating someone or celebrating them, if they're alive, you put red flowers. So because my aunt had passed away and my grandfather had passed away, I decided to cover their faces to signify that they're no longer with us. And then I end with this one, which is, I wrote this out of anger when I was in grad school because I was asked to simplify my work and simplify about the Black identity and Black imagery and picking only one subject, one narrative to focus on for this whole series. But that's the whole point. It's very much multifaceted. There isn't just one story behind it. It's very much layered. And so that was the point of it, because I was trying to eliminate the stereotype or that one narrative through this work. And I think that's it.
Which, before you close the screen, which are you in this photograph?
Yes,
Which is you?
I'm the baby. So
Oh,
I'm this one.
oh.
Yeah, I'm the youngest. My brother and sister are fraternal twins.
I, as you're going through the archives, when did you first discover this image and know that it had to be a part of the overall work you're creating?
Oh man.
And maybe it's not so much like when did it happen, but I'm curious, like where
Yeah,
in the
no.
journey of the work and how that feeling we have when we see our parents holding us, particularly as we get to be the same age or the same place in life that our parents were, like our perspective shifts. And I'm just
Mhm.
curious as to where this fit in as you were building this overall.
Yeah, I think it was like when I started to compare my father's childhood archives to my own and finding the similarities in like gestures, and not just gestures but like examining how I was brought up and how loving my father was towards me, and thinking about how his father was that way towards him. I don't, it's just the feeling you get when you look at the image.
It's I laughed a little bit, but it's really sad. But I you shared about when you shared your work with Germans, was it with German students? The birthday.
No, they were the school's French.
Oh, friend, I'm sorry. You were in.
Yeah. So, but our teachers are a mixture of French, British, and American, but it was all white staff. So it was their first time seeing these types of pictures before, and they were very much confused.
I think they might not be alone. I think
Ah,
obviously, but there's something. A roundabout way that the archives you're exposing and juxtaposing with images and messages of the injustice that people of color face every day.
mhm.
The startling thing is the normalcy, the loving, the stable home, like these things that are not associated with the images that people typically see is in some ways the startling part of the archive. It
Yeah, because I get told all the time, like, "Oh, you grew up with your father." I'm like,
mm,
"Yeah, why wouldn't I?" Like like it's you get taken back a little.
wow. What's the just briefly, and then we'll move on because I feel like I could talk to you, and I know I'm going to feel this way about Rana. We could do the whole show this just focusing on this. What I find interesting, and I'll ask I'll ask Rana about this as well, and maybe we can regroup on it. You have created elements that are purely your own work. You have elements of self-portraiture. You have elements of graphic design. You're also collaging and rearranging with an archive. Where it feels like the work it's yours, but it's a kind of a collaboration with your family in some ways, with the past. What's that process like? Where do you begin and where does the archive begin? Does it matter? Are you adding to something? Are you creating something new?
Yeah, like, man, that's hard. So I remember you had told me that it reminded you of like a family album,
Mm,
and that I think that was where I was going at first, but it's always going to change. I had work from this series that I had taken out because I no longer felt that it was necessary to have it.
mm.
And I think it's just because of a feeling that I don't know, it's a feeling that you get. And I think that's just because it's so personal and it's just my process. Yeah, I think the whole project started because like I was in a very dark place, and all I had was my family archives, and I looked through them, and it really like, I don't know, it protected me and like healed me through what I was going through, which was racism and discrimination. Because I nearly like dropped out of art school because I couldn't handle it anymore. But I remember sitting on the floor and I was like looking through them, and then I got empowered and I really wanted to make something out of this because I wanted people to feel what I felt when I looked through the images.
Wow. Forgive me, I just turned off your.
No, you're fine.
I just thought that wasn't jarring, but I thought we could come back for a moment in person. Thank you so much for sharing that and sharing the I find self portraiture very brave. I think there's something brave about opening up your family archives and talking about it
Mm.
as well. So thank you for sharing that with us. Rana, uh, Rana Young, also in our forecast show, and we've posted links in the chat, but I do hope everyone has time to visit the site and spend some time with the work. It has the feeling of a family album, but also the feeling of a curated statement. And it's cool that we've been able to do this online. It's the silver lining versus being in the gallery. Although I do wish we could all be together there. Rana, your work also draws from personal archives. I suspect there's some stories of a discovery that are different. But in looking at your work and hearing you speak of your archives, I feel like you're coming at it maybe using those archives in different ways. So I'm excited to see your work and hear more about it and share it with everybody. So with that, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, buckle up. No, just kidding. Like, where's my presentation? Hold on. There we go. Here we go. All right. Oh my gosh, it's so bright. Okay, well, thank you for sharing your work, Irene. I'm a big fan, have been for a while, and it's amazing to share this space with you today. So yeah, I guess I'll begin. I want to do give a bit of a trigger warning. I just have, two images that appear in my presentation. One references my birth very directly, and the other one references my mother's death very directly. And so I just want to say that now up front. But I think I'll begin by saying that, I think photographs can deceive us, and I definitely, aim to construct images in that vein often. And I think that's primarily because I'm interested in the sort of sentiments elicited by pictures, and how visual analysis and interpretation can lead us to one or several truths. And that negotiation that emerges between reconciling with, or recognizing and challenging those truths, directs very much my approach to the medium, especially when I'm considering this project that I'm sharing this evening. So I remember tearing out images from publications and bringing them to my dad, prepared with many questions at a very young age. And I was raised by a single father, and I experienced a very sort of traditional family structure in my home. And seeing the images, seeing images in books, magazines, on TV, that portrayed the wholeness of family, I could understand limitedly as a young person that it contradicted my reality. And I think those psychological impressions, started to provoke my curiosity, and would later propel me to begin solving the mystery of what exists beyond the scene depicted. And I was definitely one of those teenagers cutting up every magazine in the house and collaging out my bedroom walls. If you can see now, I live amongst a lot of visual stimuli. And it's, that stimuli that I sort of prefer or even require the older I get, it continues to grow around me. But I also think with that time, I've been sort of better prepared to start unpacking that a little bit for myself. And if you know me, you know that I nest. I'm quick to move into a place and make it my home as quickly as possible. And, everything has a place, and the places are all occupied, and there's typically no visual release in the room. And I think I bring that up because I'm noticing how quickly this project, is just collecting images. I'm collecting images for this work. And I see some sort of correlation with maybe needing to be sort of surrounded by images. And, that brings up some pretty common questions, I think. Am I trying to fill a void? What do I why do I get lost in the blank walls of a new house? Why am I only visible to myself amid like so many signifiers of identity, of lived and anticipated experiences? And what do I understand about myself through that stimuli? You know, and I also suppose my hunt and need for context stems from an interest in narrative as well, and how a single frame can beg as many questions as a sequence or collection. And subtle clues within either, you know, may evoke an individual's aversions or desires. And that is another a negotiation that intrigues me as well. So Lion Smile is very much an in progress series through which I examine the estranged relationship I had with my mother. And through photography, I try to depict this tension that accompanies the uncertainty I experience as I learn about a parent through her photographs, through her archive, and through secondhand sort of stories told to me. So she passed away in October of 2017. And following her death, I was conflicted with a lot of pretty brutal questions. Did I love my mother? Did I even know her at all? How could I possibly miss, what I never had? And I had to meditate on that for a while. And, flash forward, 6 months later, it's the summer of 2018. I'm, my now husband, and I decide to move to Arkansas for jobs. And I'm going a little crazy about approaching this new work. And I definitely felt a sense of urgency to exercise this fear of who my mother was. My mother was incarcerated on drug-related charges in Columbia, Missouri, my birthplace. Also, while my dad was in law school, which I think is pretty ironic. And all while I was just a toddler. And, I was young enough that I don't recall like any of it really. And that might even be more so because my dad gained full custody of me shortly after, and we immediately just moved away. So it sort of erased maybe any associations I had with that place visually too. It wasn't until I hit puberty that I began asking more questions about her and becoming increasingly curious about her history and about the physical characteristics and personality traits I inherited from a woman I didn't know. And I remember him, my dad saying, your mother was lonely. He said she was the type of lonely company can't fix. And he believed she lived in this fantasy world where deception could masquerade as charm. And he felt that was evidenced by a long pattern of impulsivity and familial neglect. He'd vaguely explain that she'd been hurt many times in her life, and navigating her life as a chameleon must have been the result of that. And, given the circumstances now, looking back, I have to ask, did my father ever really know my mother either? During my upbringing, I maintained contact with my sister, who's 11 years my senior and my mother's daughter from a previous marriage. And she had witnessed far more of our mother's life than I had, and was who I turned to when I was 18, when I was ready to meet our mother for the first time. So I drove to Nebraska, where they were both living, from Missouri at the time. And, from then until her passing, so many, many years, I worked on building a relationship with her on and off the best I could. But I was continuously met with a very similar version that my father experienced. She didn't really speak of her past, and she was often quick to redirect questions to be about me or about the future. And so at 21, it was my sister who revealed what my mother had experienced in her life. And that was that she grew up with an emotionally and physically abusive father, a disassociative mother, and experienced sexual trauma at the hands of men as both a young girl and as a young woman, including by my sister's father. And she, my sister began to express this paranoia that we descended from a cursed matrilineal line. Um, and and she felt that way because she too had experienced and suppressed similar trauma. And it all started to feel like a warning. And I spent this sort of next decade counting my blessings and sort of not asking any more questions, and feeling fortunate that I had somehow escaped this cycle that she spoke of. And I moved to Lincoln, Nebraska to attend graduate school, thinking that I was going to make work about my mother. In fact, I made different work with a former partner instead. Um, and things changed, but I definitely feel like I started making this work the moment I began inhabiting this landscape that she had spent her whole life pretty much. And those years in Nebraska, I would visit her town she lived in and talk with my sister about her, and imagine my life had she raised me. And Nebraska became, and still remains, my sort of what if place. And since, that October 3 years ago, and even just 2 days ago, I've been receiving parts of her archive that have been stored in several storage units around Lincoln and nearby towns. And along with her photographic archive and these various, personal documents and things like that, and I inherited, to my surprise, what I've been classifying as mystic paraphernalia. So crystal balls, rare gem collection, tarot cards, things of that nature. And also from journal entries with the time and date recorded, I suspect that she lived primarily during the night hours in her adult life. So, currently I think I'm concerned with investigating these forms of escapism that she perhaps was engaged in, and try to understand her persistent concealment of the shame and stigma and trauma endured from this history of experiences. And I feel that all of that plays a often unacknowledged role in women's physical and mental health issues. I've also been working with my older sister, and who finds herself today on pretrial release, awaiting federal prison sentencing on similar charges, almost identical charges to our mother's, and they're almost she's almost the same age as well. And it's sort of bittersweet, the reality that she faces, like balancing that with knowing that she's sober and receiving treatment, and that she can manage her addiction and mental health with care, and that we're able to maintain this constant contact now, which hasn't been the case in many years. She's agreed to be my collaborator on this project, which I'm really excited about, and of course is sharing more stories with me. And because she's on pretrial release, I'm able to talk to her like on a cell phone that's not being recorded. At least I don't think it is. And we're able to sort of become more vulnerable in a way that we couldn't when we first reconnected upon her arrest a couple of years ago. And it becomes hard not to think back to that warning as she tells these stories. She was able to get out on a pass and go to our aunt and uncle's farm in rural Nebraska just this week. And it's also the site where our mother passed away, and where many of these photographs were captured. And while there, she located a storage chest that contained, in my opinion, pure gold, but very much contained a 27-page police report, which feels almost like a screenplay to me at this point, detailing the night my life changed forever. And so each month I feel like I get this puzzle piece, and it just sort of further complicates what I think I should do next with this work. She was able, she's able to send me stuff now, but time is sort of running out as her sentencing date approaches. And so I feel like I'm becoming a little more concerned now with how to organize this work. And just this week I've been spending time in what I'm calling my keynote residency. Just messing around with the presentation of the work for an upcoming show. And shout out to my friend Loring Teoka, who I think is here. And when concerning how the archive is employed or manipulated, and how I'm sort of sifting through those materials, I've been thinking a lot about containment and density, continuation, aura, proximity, and cadence. And what if the container can't accommodate the content? What does it mean to layer and composite visually distilled images? What does it look like to catch up after typically being steps behind? And what does feeling look like? Do I need, and why do I need these sort of sentiments, or what do I need these sentiments to look like to better cope with them? And also thinking about how distance, directly or directs this sort of how we resolve the image or the narrative. And so thinking about the frame as a container and what it looks like when the container can't like fully align or capture this narrative, and thinking about that concept of building, sort of constellations, and how, I can sort of keep expanding or modifying that cluster. And so I'm thinking about, seduction and deception and weight. And I'm beginning to understand that I make these sort of distilled images, these quiet images, knowing that they'll soon have to negotiate with each other, I think, and accommodate each other. And it's like sort of isolating all the voices in your head, all the suspicions, all the desires, and all these impulses, to sort of piece them back together on new terms, I suppose. So as I retrace, our mother's history, I'm thinking about how these considerations might mold into visual metaphors for circumstance, and also highlight the complicated relationship between photographic record and the abstract and fragmented nature of memory. And in responding to her, her mementos, and responding to her photographs, and ultimately her absence, I'm able to construct, these sort of prosthetic memories that begin to fill in the gaps that remain in my history, as well as reinterpret what I've learned of her life, and very concretely embalm her death. I often say that I'm, perhaps attempting to render a version of my mother that I can confront, or a version of her that I can forgive. In either case, I feel like I'm negotiating with myself, with her ghost, and with the limited context present. I think my mother's likeness hangs in the air, and while I can't change her past, or my own, or ours, I intend to keep her company for a while, I think. And I'll end there. Hello, just kidding.
Wow, no. I'm sorry, is this your last slide?
I think I'm going to end there. Yeah.
Wow, my head is going in a lot of different places. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thanks.
It occurs to me that for you, you're working with an archive. It's a detective story. You're understanding a person and a loss that you didn't really get to experience firsthand, which is maybe the essence of going through albums of our past. As you're going through that, and to what degree do you feel like you're learning who your mother is, and to what degree how much are you filling in the blanks between the pieces that you have discovered? And I feel like I'm asking this question poorly. You started to speak to it at the end about how you're kind of putting the puzzle together.
Yeah.
How much do you feel are you actually discovering your mother? how much do you feel you're filling in the blanks? And I wonder if it's different for you and your sister as you work on this work together. Did that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I feel very separate from them, you know, as a family member, as you know, a woman with lived experiences. I feel like, you know, the circumstances that they faced and the circumstances my sister is facing currently was very much directed by, you know, their environment, their access to resources, their access to mental health, especially resources. It, you know, it's sort of devastating to understand that I was almost given like a pass out of that by her choices, I suppose. And I imagine that understanding her is like a sort of version of understanding a version of myself that could have been. And I say that because, you know, my sister like looks at it as like it's like in the cards already type of thing. Like it's a cursed line that we're a part of. And for me, it's like, um,
Sorry, I brought us back together physically, but we can bring
oh, it's
this.
okay. I was like, oh no, where'd it go?
I didn't mean to startle you. You were
Um,
right in the midst of a thought. You
no,
were
it's okay. No, I
talking.
was, yeah, no, I was just thinking for me, it's like, you know, their lives sort of mirror each other's because they come from the sort of same place, same circumstances, the same abandonment, you could say. Um, and I do share like that with them, I suppose, like this sort of sense of abandonment of a parent, or from a parent. But our even my sister and I's version of that is very different. You know, my mother was, you know, sort of disassociative, disconnected from my sisters. She was sort of, um, you know, she didn't. It's like it's hard not to prescribe things, right? Because I don't know for sure, but I'm gathering that she just, you know, wasn't prepared emotionally, to be a mother. And my sister, you know, what she experienced because my mom experienced that and her mom too, probably. Um, you know, it didn't really give her the tools or an example of sort of like how to be one either. And I don't have children, which is very relieving to me most times, most days. So yeah,
You know,
it's just sort
you
of weird.
you speak to something though that I think is maybe universal when we look back at our moms, when we look at something we're from, but that precedes us, that is not part of our existence. I think we are all sort of struck with that sense of we could have gone different paths. And it sounds like in your archive, particularly in the collaboration with your sister, that's really very visceral. But I think it's something that we can all at least catch a glimpse of. I want to ask you one more question, and then we can open it up. And I'd love for all of us to talk. We can turn to the audience. As you were in your work, I was thinking about which images are yours and which images were from your mother's archive. You mentioned, well, your archive contains more than photograph. You mentioned the report and journal entries and things like that. You mentioned getting gold, but you also talked about getting a lot of photographs. What did your mother take photographs of? And how does that influence your perception of her? Was she a photographer? Were they snapshots? What are the kind of images you're inheriting?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. My sister actually talked about that the other day. Yeah, she photographed mainly like social gatherings, which is something I did a lot as a teenager too on like disposable cameras. Like she documented, um, or recorded this sort of company she kept. You know, my mother was sort of someone to sort of hold court, you know, like she she was, you know, originally my dad met her because he hired her as a bar manager. He used to own this little bar when in Colombia, when he was younger, and he hired her to be the bar manager. And he just told me that like she could just sort of command attention in a way that was really fascinating to him. And he said that he witnessed men fall in love with her, for a couple of years. And and thought it was just sort of silly, like how many men were just trying to, like, I don't know, be in her company. And I don't know what that was really about, but she had this sort of like magnetism, I guess. I don't know. But and then he woke up one day and realized that he was in love with her too, which I thought was really sort of interesting. Um, but yeah, she would document, like, you know, their sort of work life, which was very social because they worked in a bar. She photographed me a lot in those first couple of years, and my older brother. She basically sort of erased my sister, which is really devastating to me, and I'm sure to my sister. Um, but I think that my sister reminded my mother of herself, and that made her uncomfortable for whatever reason. And she just did not record her likeness as much as other people's. And yeah, so it's
Wow.
mainly of friends and like social gatherings and like sort of random trips and stuff, but not really of her role in like the domestic space as much.
Hmm. Interesting. Thank you again for sharing. You know,
Yeah.
I bears reiterating, sharing family archives amounts to sharing family history, and that's a very open and vulnerable thing to do. Thank you both so much for sharing your work and for sharing your stories with us. I see a few questions in the chat that I want to turn to. Um, but one question that I thought I'd start with for both of you, and as I think about archives, they strike me as also, we have a choice about archives. We can choose to open the lid and dive into this and see where it takes us. I think we wouldn't necessarily fault someone for choosing to, you know what, I don't need to look to that past. I'm going to go in a different direction. Why did you both make the choice to not just open the archive, but to filter and resort it and make it the stuff of something new, to make it the medium you're working with as artists? This strikes me as there's some motivation to do this, and you've both invested so much. What made you decide to work with archives, either of you?
Oh, do you want me to go?
No, I want you to go.
um, I had a really I had a dilemma in grad school of taking photographs because I'm living in a very tourist place, and also thinking about just photography in general as a tool of violence for BIPOC communities. And so I just, at that moment in time, I wasn't in the right state of mind to like photograph other people. And so I came home for the summer. And at that point, I wanted to spend time with my grandmother, who's 90, and go through the images because I was just afraid that she wouldn't remember the people anymore. And I don't know, there was just something in me where I want to at least have those people identified. Um, and that's what happened. I was there just to scan family archives, and then it turned into seeing all these beautiful images I've never seen before, and her telling me stories about my father, you know, like stealing oranges out of someone's yard, or like going to the park, or they had to be home at a certain time because Conroe was a sundown town. And just hearing like those stories and learning about that, it connected me a lot with my grandmother because I wasn't very that close to my grandmother. So that brought us together. But those images were a form of healing for me. Once I had them digitized and I had them with me when I was abroad, it really helped me get through what I was going through.
Rana,
Yeah.
what made you choose to continue to work with these archives? You're getting new archives every month, you were saying.
Yeah, it's coming on strong. Yeah, I mean, I think that I'll be honest in saying I have always felt a little behind in life in some ways. Like I had like reading comprehension issues growing up. I dropped out of high school. I didn't start undergrad until I was 24. You know, it's like you hit these sort of mile marker, and you're watching your peers sort of succeed in ways that you don't feel like you can. And I didn't really understand why that was. And my dad is like a pretty hyper intellectual, like scholar type. And our learning styles were very different, are very different. My dad, I think, has sort of a photographic memory. He can recall information at a rate that I haven't seen in many people. And I'm sort of the opposite of that, where I don't really feel like I can, reach back and deliver, recite something as easily. But, I think in wanting to understand myself better, it's important to try to understand, who I come from, as sort of general as that sounds. But, I think I've learned a lot of details about my mother. And one of them is that, just this year I was diagnosed with adult ADHD, which explains a lot in terms of my learning style and all of those things. And come to find out, my mother was diagnosed with the very same thing, and also the same type of anxiety that I experience as well. And so I think it's like understanding her, helps me understand myself, and then I can maybe, start to cope with how those things sort of direct decisions. Yeah, I guess I'll say
Sounds
that.
like maybe a place of overlap for both of you is that going into these archives is rooted in a form of healing and understanding,
Yeah.
which perhaps is maybe what motivates us to keep and view archives at all in some ways, at least those personal ones.
Yeah.
I want to turn to a question that Hannah Altman wrote in the chat that I think captures a little bit different. It was along the lines of what I was thinking. And Hannah, if you'd like to unmute or go on the camera, you're welcome, but I'm going to read your question for now. Do you see the photographs as, and this is for both of you, do you see the photographs as filling in the blanks of something you're trying to understand, or is it documenting an absence in your life? Does that change as you go through these archives?
Irene?
I don't know. I think it's more of a gesture for me, or like an emotion that I'm feeling at that point in time. Like I said, like the work changes, however I'm feeling that month or that year. Sometimes I can't even look at some of the photographs because I'm grieving again. And so it's hard for me to look at those images. I've shown images to my father of his dad, and he can't look at it. He can't look at some of my images because he gets so upset because he's not over the death of his father. But that's just part of the process. I don't think I'm trying to fill a void necessarily. I think I'm just showing you how I'm feeling in that moment.
I am. I'm just kidding. I'm feeling something. I don't know. Feels that way. I don't seem to be satisfied with like any amount. And I feel that way outside of like this project. It's like I sort of surround myself with stimuli, and it's got to be an attempt to fill something, right?
Yeah.
Maybe.
You don't feel tired though, or drained when you go through the images?
I don't know. Maybe the disconnect is severe enough
Yeah.
that I can be more objective than other people might. If it were like, if my dad died, like I don't make work about my dad because I can barely get through this without like choking up a little bit.
Oh my God, please don't. I'm gonna cry.
No, I know. But if I made work about my dad, I would probably just have to log off and go to bed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Hannah, I see you you turned your camera on. Would you like to ask a question?
Oh no, it felt weirder to not have it on as they were like kind of answering my question. So I was like making virtual eye contact. But thank you both for answering in such in depth, because I think your work has like an interesting relationship to each other in that one sort of feels more like absence and one sort of feels more like presence, but there's kind of holes in both, and I think they have like an interesting relationship together.
Thank you.
I find your father's reaction really interesting, Irene. I'm, as we're discussing this, I'm reminded, perhaps this has happened to others too. My phone will sometimes go through my photographs and say, hey, here's a new memory from 10 years ago. And there are times when that's not a memory I want to be confronted with. I know the archive is there, but I'm like, yeah, no, I don't need this right now. Like, I'm not ready to see this right now, which I think can be very interesting. Have you, Irene, you mentioned it with your father. Can you speak a little bit more to the family members, the in some ways, the subjects and source of the material? How do they feel when they're on a website or part of a presentation you're giving? What's your relationship with them?
Mhm. Well, first I have to like let them know, hey, I'm using this image, or hey, are you okay with me using this? But a lot of it is just my father's family, so like his sister, my granny, my granddaddy, and then just that side of the family. So they're okay with it. I think relating to like to my aunt and my grandfather, it's still very much, it's a tough it's a touchy topic. When we were going through like the archives of my grandfather to my granny, she was quiet, she didn't react, she was just like, oh, we're just gonna put this away. And that's how she was with his death. He died when I was 9, and so like we didn't talk about it after he passed. It was just, and that's how it is with most of the deaths in our family. We don't talk about it, and it's not like we're not allowed to grieve. And so I guess when I bring those images in, that's like my form of like grieving, since I wasn't really allowed to grieve at that time.
We had a question. Ronte, you were willing to, there you are, please. You might still be on mute though. There you are.
What's up, Raina? What's up, Bean? I had to hop on
Hey, bro.
kinfolk. My question, well, first of all, I just gotta say it's pretty cool that my professor, while I'm here in Arkansas, is doing work right next to my kinfolk from Houston. So that's pretty cool. But y'all work, you know, it's a lot of similarities and it's a lot of overlap, and especially I'm thinking more of just how it looks and the layering and collaging. And you know, I know Irene uses a lot of materiality and creating these installations. So can both of y'all kind of talk about y'all methodology as it pertains to layering and objectifying these photographs?
Yeah, I mean, I think I look at it as sort of I mean, it's all just a giant negotiation. And depending on what I ate for breakfast that day, like that negotiation shifts, and like, or one side sort of dominates, maybe if it's like a polarity of some sort. So I'm thinking about like, you know, what that conversation looks like. It's like, I don't have like, I guess I'm used to working with someone more directly, and I have that with my sister on some level. There's still distance there, and up until even a couple months ago, it was monitored. You know, it's like she couldn't really talk to me the way she wanted to. But you know, now I have her help a little bit, but we're still sort of on one side of the conversation. She can fill in some of those gaps, but I think the layering and the sort of relationships present in any sort of composite or iteration, I guess, for me is sort of highlighting or giving a sort of map through that negotiation, through that conversation with myself, I guess. If that makes any fucking sense. Yeah. Tay, is that good for you? No.
Yeah, I would say like some of the choices are like, I hate saying this word over and over again, but it's a feeling. And then others are just standalone pieces where they speak for themselves. Others I pair together because it's like I'm trying to reiterate like the message behind that image, specifically the ones with text. When I use objects, it's because I have a personal connection or a cultural connection to it, whether it be from my upbringing in the church or growing up in the South. Um, I'm just showcasing all the different forms of like my identity in the work, and that's why I incorporate those in my photographs.
That's a great
Good.
question. Thank you, Rob.
Miss you, bro.
And of course, any others with questions, please post them in the chat, and anyone else who would like to participate. It's wonderful. Thank you for joining us. A question that we talked about a little bit briefly when we met earlier. When we think of archives, at least when I do, I think we often think of physical archives. We think about the shoebox our parents had, or the album that our grandparents had. We're thinking of physical things. And we filter through these physical things that feel precious to us. And then you scan them and manipulate them and turn them into other physical things. Do you think your work would be different if it weren't for these physical artifacts that you're going through?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of cuts out having to make a lot of the images. You know, like there's something really liberating about that on some level, you know, and some of the images I want to make or spaces I want access to, I either talk myself out of it or I just physically can't access that sort of space again. Or I can't do it better than the photograph I found already. And so I think, you know, it's complicated because I like feel sort of weird about that sometimes, where I'm like, well, is I like good enough, like to sort of, you know, like pluck that, cherry pick these, you know, images for like what I need them for. And for me, it's like coming from this archive, it feels like images that were sort of made for me to use. I don't know if that makes sense, but it almost, I just like, why keep all this stuff? I mean, we're talking stuff, like a lot of shit, like just images, documents, all this stuff that's coming in, you know, in rounds where it's a little overwhelming. I'm like, what was all this saved for? Like, if you were absent as a parent and there was ample time to even share these things with me, like these objects, and that never happened. And then they sat in these like storage units, right, that were sort of defaulted to her children to manage, and we did, and we still are. But like, what would they left behind for if it wasn't supposed to convince us of something or sort of shed light on something? You know, I told you earlier, my sister is excited about this project because she thinks it's going to prove her right about something. It's going to like unveil some sort of conspiracy, you know, some sort of curse that she really believes in. And so I don't know, it's almost like it was set up to be this way or something.
Irene, does so much of your work what's the relationship between the physical collection, the archive, and the work itself? Because I feel like the two are separate for both of you. The images, if we had a wall, would be images you created, but the archive, the originals, are still separate and of themselves, and I would think, and protected. What's that relationship between the archive itself and your work?
Well, the work is stuff that I made of what I was going through in the present time and comparing them to like my father's childhood and then my childhood, but like the present time of me now in like 2018, 2019, and 2020. I remember you had said that it's almost like we're curating the work, and I don't know, I wouldn't label me as like curating it. It's more, I guess it's my way of like protecting or a keeper of this work. I don't know. I have this sense that I just want to protect it, because if I just let them stay there in my grandmother's closet, they probably would have faded more. I restored a lot of them. I reprinted them, and now they're in an album. So now other families can have these images. Um, I don't know. I think that was like my point when I first like had scanned the images, because I was like, oh, I bet so and so would like this picture, or such and such would love this picture, because we only had one copy of it, and that was precious, because once it's gone, it's gone. You don't have it anymore. Um, so it came from that place. But then hearing the stories about it, of each individual picture, I wanted to incorporate that in my work.
Yeah, I think I treat the archive as sort of like negatives or something. Like they, you know, I sort of utilize them the one time and like get them digitally converted, and they get put away, and I protect them. Like Irene said, it's, you know, when you don't have access to this like record, there's a lot at stake, you know, once you get it. Like you don't want to lose it. You don't want it to get ruined. Like you're dealing with fading, and like I'm dealing with mold, you know, it's like, and I understand that. If I wasn't in this position making this work in the time that I'm making it, and how everything aligned, this archive would have died. Like it would have just disappeared, or would have stayed in a storage unit until my aunt and uncle died. And then like what would have happened? There's nobody left. Like there aren't like kids left that have an interest in you know, these documents. So again, it sort of feels like, I don't know, this weird sort of intervention that was like already planned out. And we won't get into beliefs, but you know what I mean.
In some ways, you're making it more real. You're making these archives more visible. But you said something that really struck me. In some ways, it's like negatives. It is the material from which you draw. So a question for both. Do both of you feel that way? Is the work you're creating, are you adding to the archive, or are you creating something new and different and distinct that stands on its own? Or does that even really matter as a question? I'm not sure. But I feel like there's this material you're drawing from, and then something you're unique you're creating. Is it a negative work kind of relationship? It seems like it's more nuanced and more organic than that.
Wow. I don't know. I haven't. I'm like, I don't know.
Maybe I'm because I haven't. I find that just the way you're creating your own work and using an archive, both of you, I think, in very subtle ways, are weaving something together that is greater than the sum of its parts. It's not simply an archive. It's not simply a unique work. Well, maybe in the few minutes we have left, maybe I wonder, having met each other and shared some work, what are the questions that you might have for each other in the ways you approach archives? Forgive me if I'm startling you by turning the mic this way, but I think a lot of us might be curious now, and as we've seen your work and heard your perspectives, how the questions you have for each other as artists working with a similar medium, I think could be really interesting.
Yeah, I think about like what you might like how do you know when, like, what to protect about your family or about, yourself. I think that's one of the hardest parts. Like hardest parts, like everything I'm doing is so selfish, but poor me. But yeah, in that process, I guess, what do you want to protect about all of this, all that you're learning? And I guess that's a complicated question.
Yeah, no.
How do you answer what you don't want to answer? But you know what I mean? Like, how do you go about deciding that? Or does anything sort of go, like, do you put like limits on what you unveil?
I think limits on like my mental health and like what I'm able to talk about. Cause at one point in time, like this is like I want to say it's not off topic, but I've been working on archives before with like my great aunt, who took care of me, and she passed away due to spousal abuse. And I couldn't, I limit myself to that project. And in fact, I had to switch gears and work on a different project because I felt myself consumed in the work. And then I felt myself in a way almost becoming her, because I was so very much invested in the images and learning about her and investigating and asking all of her friends. And I had so much similarities and I was cross-examining myself. Um, so, so that I limit myself in that sense on my, and I'm trying to focus more on my mental health because it wasn't really taught to me growing up. We don't talk about mental health and setting boundaries for ourselves. Protecting, maybe I'm protecting myself from grief, because I'm an empath, and like I mourn for everyone. So when I when I look at an image, I become sad once they tell me the story behind the person that has passed away. I protect the image in the sense of someone trying to change the narrative of the image, when I've showcased it in places, trying to make it very much simplified and linear. And so I'm become verbal, and that's my way of protecting it by saying, no, that's not the case with this photograph. Um, yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of ways that I guess protect it.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure that out. It's hard because I feel like I'm sort of willing to like to share anything, you know, but then it often feels like, are you like, are you sharing it because you think that they'll like that the audience will access it quicker or some, you know, it's like the shock value sort of side of things. It's sort of like, how much do you unveil that sort of like, that's, you know, like reliving or sort of minding this trauma,
Yeah.
just to like defend the work, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
I think that's what becomes challenging.
Yeah, I feel like you're going through trauma again as you're talking to us about this.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, and so like I do you have to take breaks? Do you just continue working? Do you work on different projects, or you're just solely committed to just working on this at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I talk a lot about like sort of what I've lost, and I've noticed that in my career so far, where a lot of my work is rooted in loss, and like I'm making elegies on loss. Usually, that's kind of how it pans out. Um, but I think I'm able to do that because I have a lot too. Like I have a lot of positive shit going on. Like I have a wonderful husband. I have a job in a pandemic. Like I realized that if this had happened 3 years ago, I would be so fucked right now, like so completely destroyed financially, right? And
Let
it
me
didn't. It happened in this moment where I can work from home because students are still registering to take classes. And, you know, like I have these like awesome, amazing and things, and I have an immense amount of privilege in
I,
many, many facets of my life.
I want to pop in briefly. Thank you both for sharing. It's I think it's interesting to hear you both ask questions of each other, and as you were asking these questions and sharing, I think very different relationships with the archives you're working with. Um, Even though we all understand what it is to work with an archive, you're coming at it from different perspectives. And Nate asked a question that was, I think, on all of our minds, and you've started to answer it a lot this evening. But to what extent is going through this archive, um, and also creating your work, is it a therapy for you? Is it purely artistic? Um, it feels like the work is artistic as well as doing your own work on yourselves. Is that an active choice? Is it just part of the work? How does it help or hinder or?
That's complicated.
I think, yeah, I think some days it can be helpful, and then other days it can be detrimental, and then you don't want to do anything. I mean, therapy, if we think about therapy, like it's not there to like fix you. It's just there to like listen to you, engage you. So I guess that's what I use it as. Like I don't use it to like fix me or like overcome something, because like there's always going to be another issue. Yeah. Huh.
I don't know. Yeah, I feel like I'm a little bit of an instigator, like in life in general. I like to push buttons a little bit, especially my husband's. He's here. You know, I feel like there's this sort of gap between like what I experienced as a child or what I understand of that experience and like how I like look at it now. And like I said, it's like whether I've suppressed memories or they just didn't register because I was too young. Like either way, there's this gap. And I think I'm just trying to like, you know, mind the gap. I'm trying to figure out like what exists in that space. And with the art making, it's complicated because I witnessed my students, Tay Butler being one of them, you know, who's they constantly make things. It's like an impulse. It's a part of their everyday practice. And I think I do that in other forms. Like I like curate spaces I'm in. I like fill it with things I want to look at. I, you know, do those sorts of things. But the art making is complicated for me because I do a lot of it up here first, right, in my head. And I work in sort of these weird bursts where I'll do sort of a lot at once. But I have found, especially since grad school and like having a job that requires me, you know, to make work, it's like part of the expectation of my role, that it's often hard to tell if I'm making out of like impulse, out of like intuition, or if I'm making because I have a show coming up or, you know, whatever it is. So it's hard sometimes to tell the difference between like what is stable and what isn't sometimes. And so, yeah, that's probably why there's a lot of versions of my work out on the internet that I'm not really happy about right now, but that's okay.
I think you answered the question in an interesting way, that when you go to create, you're not looking for a solution. I think when we make a choice to go to a therapist, say, I think we're actively trying to maybe solve something or fix something or explore something. I think the interesting part, though, is that there's a choice to say, oh, I want to go see a therapist. I feel like there's something very brave and interesting about the choice to go into these archives, particularly when you don't know what you're going to find, particularly when it might feel, I imagine there are times when it's a bit frightening to go to the archive, when you open that the first time, and it takes that commitment, I would think, to try to explore or understand. I think requires a bravery that we don't always have. I don't always have. I think it's sometimes difficult to open that up. So thank you for sharing that. And I think there's something similar to that in terms of seeking therapy or help in other ways. Few more minutes left. We can always go over if we have to, but any questions from anybody else? I love it when you have questions for each other. If there's, we can always come back to that.
We've covered so much. I'm like trying to think, Irene.
It's a lot. Well, I'm curious. Well, go ahead. I'll give you just a moment as we. It's okay. We have covered. We have covered a lot. Well, with that, I think maybe we will start to wrap it up. I want to thank you both for being here, for sharing your work, for sharing so much of yourselves with these archives, and of course, for being a part of FORECAST 2020. thank you all for the new faces here. Here's something I'd like to give you both an opportunity to do. Got some friends. Is there anybody we want to shout out for being here? Some friends and students in the that
So
showed up?
many people. I'm like honestly just shocked seeing. I feel like I know almost everybody here. It's crazy.
Hi, all.
Well, thank you so much for
Wow.
sharing your work with us and for bringing so many people to San Francisco Camera Work. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, this is the first in a series of conversations we'll be having about the work in our Forecast exhibit. And it's the first of a series of conversations we're having around working with archives. If you join us at our next event coming up on November 18th, we'll be talking with Rachel Fine-Smolinski. I'm sorry, back to back. On November 17th, we have a conversation about the found photograph with Kim Beal and Carlos Chavarria in conversation. Also talking about archives and found images. And then the Juror's Choice Award winner will be having a talk with us on November 18th, Rachel Fine-Smolinski, who works with medical archives. So we're really, really excited to have a body of work and a group of artists that allows these conversations. So Irene and Rana, thank you for joining us. We are going to wrap it up pretty soon, but please join us for those events coming up. Thank you all for being here. I want to give a shout out to Christina Graber, who helps produce this. And our board president, Michelle Branch, is in the house. And so, Michelle, I want to acknowledge you. And would you like to say anything with the audience or say hello, or is it enough to just give you a wave?
I'll just say hi.
Mike, you got to say hi. Thank you.
I'll say hi. Nice to see everybody. Thank you for joining. We really appreciate it. Looking forward to seeing you.
Forecast is one of our favorite events, and Michelle and I talk about that a lot. So we're grateful that you can all be with us here digitally. Again, if you'd like to join us for future events or become a member, join us at sfcamerawork.org. Thank you all again for being here, and we will see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you all. It was nice talking to you.
You too, Irene.
We'll talk soon.
Honor, for sure.
We will have you both back again soon, I'm sure. Thank you all again.
Bye, y'all. Sweet dreams.
Oh, yeah.
It's late in the Midwest. Bye.
Bye.